Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with fancy crackers. That's right, we're heading into peak entertaining season. And while I don't mind people spending too much money on amazing artisan cheeses, it does bother me seeing people paying $7 or $8 for a little package of fancy crackers at those same shops. Which is why I'm so excited to show you these easy-to-make Rosemary sea salt crackers, which by the way are technically crispy flatbreads. But we'll get into that a little later. For now, let's get cracker lacking and begin by mixing up our dry ingredients. So in a mixing bowl, we'll start with some regular all-purpose flour, to which we will add some salt, as well as a little bit of sugar, plus one single flack of black pepper, which is going to help bring out the sweetness of that sugar. Actually, I'm just kidding. That was unintentional. But having said that, black pepper would work in this if you wanted. But anyway, let's continue on by stirring in some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. And the reason I like to stir it into the flour at this point before adding our liquid is so all those little particles of cheese get coated, which I believe prevents it from clumping together as we mix in the liquid. So that may or may not make a big difference, but it feels right. But anyway, let's continue on by adding some freshly chopped rosemary, or of course another fresh herb of your choice. After all, you guys are the Russian hackers of these homemade fancy crackers. Allegedly. So put what you want. And once our dough's been herbed, we'll go ahead and finish this off with a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, as well as last but not least, some nice cold fresh water. And then what we're going to do is grab a fork and give this a mix until it comes together to form a fairly soft, fairly sticky dough ball. And this is generally the same strategy whenever we make a dough. We want to start off on the sticky side because it's always easier to knead flour in than try to add more liquid later. And by the way, do not worry about overmixing this dough. Okay, there's two main varieties of crackers. There's the crispy, flaky, fragile sort of biscuit style, where it's critical not to overmix the dough. And then there's this much sturdier, crunchier flatbread style, which is what we're doing here, where that is not going to be an issue. So like I said, we'll mix that together until our dough ball forms, at which point we'll stop and transfer that onto a floured surface, where we're going to give it a brief kneading, adding as much flour as necessary, until we have a dough ball that's still relatively soft and supple, but is no longer too sticky to work with. And exactly how much flour that's going to take is totally up to you, and your fingers, because you're going to feel it. So I'll knead it for a little bit, and if it feels like it's still too sticky, I'll work in a little more flour, until I think I'm going to be able to roll it out nice and thin without any major problems. And again, with a traditional flaky biscuit-style cracker, this would be a problem. Okay, we don't want to work the dough this much. But for the crispy flatbread-style crackers we're doing, this is actually an advantage. So I continued on until mine felt right, at which point we are ready to roll and cut our dough. And you can if you want to do this all at once, but I'm going to divide mine in half because I think it's easier to work with. Plus, I'm just going to cook off one pan for the sake of the video. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that in half, and then flour and press down that piece, so that, like I said, we can roll this out relatively thin. And just like when we were kneading the dough, as you're doing this, you're going to dust it with enough flour to keep it from sticking. And what we're shooting for here is something that's at least 1/8 of an inch thick or less. All right, if your dough is too thick, it'll still work, and they'll still brown up in the oven and be crunchy, but they just won't have as nice a texture. So we're going to keep rolling until it's at least this thin. So like I said, about 1/8 of an inch or less. And we can also check here that it's not sticking to the table. So notwithstanding any kind of uniform shape, that's looking pretty good. And we can move on to the next step, which is brushing this very lightly with water. And I do mean very lightly. In fact, you can see some streaks here that look a little lighter, which is where I brushed down the water a little thick, but it was fine. So maybe next time I'll spray it. But bottom line, you want to moisten that surface just a little bit, because that's what's going to make our topping stick. So once that's set, I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle over some coarse sea salt. Or if we were doing seeded crackers, you would do the exact same thing, except you'd sprinkle over poppy and sesame and fennel seeds instead. But this time I'm just going with the salt. And then once that's been accomplished, what we need to do next is prick the dough, or dock the dough, which is the official culinary term. And all that means is take a fork, as you see me doing here, and pricking that dough all over. And no, I don't go in any particular pattern. I prefer to do this completely randomly and haphazardly until the entire surface is pricked. Sorry, I mean docked. And above and beyond giving it a pretty cool look when it's baked, all those little holes are going to prevent this from puffing up too much in the oven. Oh, it'll puff up a little bit, and we'll have little blisters here and there, but not so much that it would affect our desired texture and appearance. And then once our dough has been docked, we'll take a pizza cutter and cut these into whatever shape and size we want. And as you're about to see, I'm just going to go with some nice boring plain rectangles. But obviously that's going to be up to you. Triangles are nice. As you've heard me say before, people like pointy food. But anyway, I'm just going to go with some right angles this time. And if I wasn't trying to make this look nice for the pictures, I probably wouldn't do any trimming, and I would just leave these fairly irregular, or as we call it in the business, rustic. But I did trim it up a little bit. And then what we'll do once these are cut is transfer them onto a lined baking sheet. Oh, and by the way, make sure you keep your fingers well floured. Because we painted that surface with water, this stuff is really sticky and hard to move, as I just illustrated right there. But one way or another, we're going to transfer these onto a baking sheet, which I've lined with a silicone baking mat. I'm guessing parchment paper would also work nicely. And once those have been panned up, we are ready to bake. So let's go ahead and transfer those into the center of a 400-degree oven for between 12 and 15 minutes, or until they're beautifully browned. And the exact time is going to depend on how thick they are. So these are what mine look like after 12 minutes. And as you can see, some look perfect, but others I think need a little more time. So what we'll do is pick off the ones that look good. Yes, painfully using our bare fingers. Hey, it builds character. But if you have enough character and don't want to burn yourself, you can use tongs. But either way, we'll pull the ones that look good off and simply pop the rest back in for a few more minutes. And while we're waiting for those, let's go ahead and give this first batch the crunch test. Oh yeah, that sounds legit. So just don't be going by color. Make sure these are crispy, crunchy, and cooked all the way through. And thanks to a few more minutes in the oven, that's eventually how all my crackers ended up. And that's it. As soon as all our crackers have cooled completely, they are ready to enjoy. Or, if we want, I guess we could transfer them into some kind of weathered basket and take a few pictures and then enjoy them. And enjoy them I did. And above and beyond their gorgeous appearance and crunchy texture, I really do enjoy that little hint of rosemary and Parmesan in these, especially since these were made specifically to go with some beautiful, beautiful Italian cheese. So I went ahead and served this up with some litter, which is actually made from goat, sheep, and cow's milk, and really is every bit as insanely delicious as it looks. But no matter what cheese you're spreading on, the reason these flatbread-style crackers work so well is that they don't break apart when you swipe on the cheese. I mean, have you ever seen someone after 3 glasses of wine try to spread a cheese like this on a thin regular cracker? It's not pretty, and there's crumbs everywhere, and there's cheese on their fingers. But with these, that's not a problem. They are as user-friendly as they are tasty. So in conclusion, is it really worth all that extra time and effort to save a few dollars making your own homemade fancy crackers? Well, of course not. And now we got to pick a grape up off the floor. But despite all that, I think you should make these anyway. Because just imagine living in a world where people only did things that were worth the time and effort. Personally, I shudder at the thought. And I hope you feel the same. So I really do hope you give these a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.